Hey guys, tonight we're going to trace the laziest, dustiest footprints across the cloud-marbled floors of Mount Olympus. You're standing beneath a pair of impossibly golden scales, each pan the size of a chariot wheel, suspended in midair by nothing but sparkling divine ambivalence. One pan dips lower, the other rises, though they carry no grain, gold, or gladiator skulls. These scales, forged by Hephaestus himself using materials that historians still argue might have been harvested from a dead star, weigh something more abstract than you're ready for right now: human fate. Or, more accurately, how boring most of it really is. You think the scales of Zeus would balance life and death, good and evil, epic love and tragic downfall. But no. Tonight they measure the slow accumulation of choices so small they wouldn't even make it into a flashback sequence. Like whether a shepherd picks up his staff before sunrise or after brushing his remaining teeth with mint-flavored twigs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand with your arms crossed beneath the infamous golden scales of Olympus. The structure above you emits a faint glow, less like heavenly radiance and more like the dull flicker of an overworked vending machine. There's a soft whirring, not unlike an old printer deciding whether to jam. You'd expect something more dramatic, given these scales are what Zeus uses to literally tip the balance of fate. But mostly, it just feels bureaucratic. Zeus stands nearby, scratching his beard with the same vague irritation someone has when choosing between two flavors of hummus. He squints at the floating script hovering beside the scale. Columns of names, times, incidents. The list scrolls endlessly, like the world's most exhausting spreadsheet. What is a Melaton from Paros, and why is he dreaming about butter again? He mumbles. The scales groan as they shift. You hear the clang of cosmic weights being summoned. Noisy bronze cubes embossed with confusing symbols. One shaped like a broken promise, another like an old slipper. You realize the scale isn't judging right or wrong. It's judging impact. Did Melitons dream about butter tip his destiny in any way? Or was it just another warm blob of unconscious dairy? You trudge forward and peek at the weights. One is labeled potential regret, minor. Another reads unspoken compliment, to goat. This is the stuff fate hinges on? Apparently. Historians still argue whether these weights were metaphorical or literal, or if they were created just to confuse mortals and drive aspiring philosophers into early retirement. As you help Zeus sort the latest queue of mortals, the scale lurches again. It lists sideways, like a canoe taking on soup. You blink, trying to make sense of the new readings. One pan now holds a feather, a coin, and what might be a half-written love letter to someone named Gorgina. The other pan is empty. Zeus sighs. Another pointless romance, he says. No real consequences. Just awkward eye contact and years of inner monologue. He makes a tiny scribble in midair, and the scales reset. You wonder how long this has been going on. How many times has Zeus looked down at the world, narrowed his eyes, and shrugged? How many minor arguments, missed glances, forgotten birthdays, and dropped apples have been weighed and dismissed? The scale doesn't just balance lives. It categorizes their importance in the long, stretched-out yawn of history. A breeze picks up. Not the kind you feel on your skin, but the sort of wind that shifts through ideas. The scales begin to tremble slightly, not from the breeze, but from the arrival of the next case. A small glowing orb floats upward from the world below, landing in the center of one pan with a soft plop. It's the essence of a decision made just seconds ago by a teenage potter in Corinth who chose not to steal an extra clay bead. Noble? Maybe. But impactful? Doubtful. 0.3 fate units, Zeus mutters. Yawn. Suddenly, a bolt of divine memory strikes you, because of course you've been here before. Remember that time a farmer's sneeze shifted the fate balance and triggered a 3-year drought? That was wild. But this? This is fate in its purest, dullest form. An endless parade of micro-decisions, most of which barely ripple the surface of mortal consequence. You sit cross-legged on a nearby cloud, trying to stay awake. A small creature shuffles into view, a fate bug, known in some circles as a pseudo-scarabus tedious. It exists solely to alert the gods when a fate incident has occurred. But it often arrives several hours late and confused about which plane of existence it's on. Tonight, it buzzes up and crashes into the side of the golden scale, mistaking it for a sandwich. Charming, you whisper. Zeus ignores the bug. He's adjusting the counterbalance now, a mechanism involving a string of worry beads that dangle from the scale's fulcrum. Each bead represents one mortal's weekly level of existential dread. As he adds another bead, you feel a faint collective sigh rise from the earth. Half of Crete just gave up on their new diets. Then the scroll refreshes again. A new name appears. Theon of Delphi. Zeus hums. This one might be interesting. Theon recently chose to tell the truth about a stolen amphora, even though no one asked. Bold. Pointless. But bold. The scales flicker. Theon's truthfulness lands softly on one side. On the other, an old grudge from a cousin who secretly hates pottery. The scale tips imperceptibly, and then rights itself. Null result, Zeus murmurs. Try again later. And you're back to waiting. The golden scales hum. The cosmic bureaucracy grinds on. Above you, the stars wheel in lazy loops. Below you, mortals keep living, arguing over olives, dropping promises like marbles, dreaming about butter, and sometimes, just sometimes, doing something fate-worthy. But not tonight. Tonight, the scale barely moves. You're still on the cloud, legs dangling off the side, as Zeus lumbers over to the golden scales with the enthusiasm of a retired centaur being asked to return to active duty. His enormous sandals, comically labeled Property of Supreme Deity Number 1 in glittering embroidery, scuff lightly across the mist. He sighs again. Not a dramatic thunderclapping sigh. No, this is the exhausted exhale of someone who forgot he had an entire second inbox. Let's see who's next, he mutters. The scroll beside the scales unfurls again with an audible flap. You expect some juicy fate twist, perhaps a hero's fatal flaw, a love triangle set in motion by a misunderstanding involving divine goats? But no. The text reads, Petros of Sieros argued with his neighbor about whose chicken started crowing first. You blink. Zeus blinks. Somewhere a nymph coughs awkwardly. This is what they're sending me now? He says. Chicken squabbles? You try to offer a consoling pat on his massive godly shoulder, but your hand just kind of bounces off. There's a shimmer to his form now, like he's fading in and out of admin mode. Here's a secret. Zeus hates this part of the job. Not the lightning bolts, not the throne sitting, not even the dramatic punishments. He secretly rehearses those in the mirror. No, it's this fate-weighing nonsense that wears him down. He was never supposed to be the HR rep of destiny. But when the fates outsourced mid-tier decision processing to Olympus, guess who got stuck with the overflow? That's right, Big Z. Hephaestus tried to make the job easier by designing the scales with an auto-weigh function. But like most divine prototypes, it only works half the time and emits a weird smell if used on Wednesdays. You shuffle beside the scales and glance at the two pans. One now contains a small, handmade whistle carved from olive wood. The other? A clump of straw shaped suspiciously like a chicken foot. The scales twitch, then fall still. Should we? You ask. Nope, Zeus says flatly. Let it balance itself. I'm on my 15. He vanishes in a puff of administrative apathy, leaving you to babysit the divine apparatus. You take a deep breath and examine the control interface, a series of levers, knobs, and what looks like a marble run for fate beads. There's even a lever labeled Emergency Meaning Crisis. You decide not to touch that one. Historians still argue whether this entire apparatus was symbolic or literally required divine babysitting, but judging by your current role as celestial intern, you're leaning toward painfully real. Another scroll flutters into existence. This one has slightly more drama. Antheia, priestess of Artemis, chose not to hex her cheating ex. Now that's something. You watch as the scale plunks down two weights, one marked forgiveness, unverified, and the other resentment, dormant. You think forgiveness might win, but then the resentment weight suddenly flickers. Someone gossiped about Anthea in the agora. And just like that, balance restored. You glance skyward, wondering how many of these decisions stack up across the eons. Not every choice is a Helen of Troy moment. Some are barely a sneeze, but they do add up, eventually. That's what makes the job so thankless. Zeus pops back in with a roasted fig and a half-eaten scroll of baklava. He chews thoughtfully as he observes the hovering data. You know, they used to sacrifice goats to get out of this kind of nonsense, he says. Now I've got interns. You ignore that, sort of. Instead, you point at a new scroll spinning into view. Oh, look, Demeter sent in a joint request. Something about grain surplus karma? Zeus groans so loudly a nearby satyr drops his lyre. Nope, not again. I'm not weighing 12 sheaves of barley against emotional closure. Apparently, there was once a divine conference about whether agricultural intentions could carry karmic weight. The minutes were never finalized. Scholars still debate whether that's why all wheat-based fortunes are slightly inaccurate. Zeus wipes honey off his beard. Remind me why I don't just delegate all this to Hermes? Because last time he rerouted all fate flows through Macedonia, you say, sighing. We had 3 consecutive prophecies about fish. He nods. Right, that was weird. A glowing cube drops from the sky and lands gently on the scale. It pulses with warm yellow light and smells faintly of cardamom. Another dream, you whisper. The scales shift slightly. The dream belongs to an old man in Knossos who wishes to become a bird, not metaphorically. Just literally. Feathers, beak, the whole package. Zeus raises an eyebrow. Weigh that against the logic of nature, he murmurs. And add a pinch of delusion. You search the side tray for something labeled biological impossibility. There it is, right next to hopeful madness. You plop both in, and the scale shudders before blinking out the result. Mild regret. Feather addition. Zeus claps once. Moving on. And so the queue continues. Fate after fate, some epic, most mundane. A shepherd misses a ferry and narrowly avoids meeting his soulmate. A child chooses grapes over figs, altering their future dreams forever. A merchant lies about his beard length during a trade negotiation, and destiny shrugs. You catch Zeus looking wistfully at the sky. Sometimes I miss the old days, he says, when fates were bold, clear, cursed or blessed. Now it's just middle management divinity. Maybe that's the point, you say. Most people live somewhere in the middle. Not gods, not monsters, just people trying not to trip on their own sandals. Zeus grunts. Poetic, slightly annoying, but poetic. You lean back against the base of the scales. The golden metal is warm, humming quietly with stored consequence. It vibrates just slightly, like the pulse of a world not quite decided. There's peace in this boredom, comfort in the absurdity of it all. You're not weighing the end of days, just small choices, quiet consequences. The tick-tock of fate's clock, clicking forward whether anyone notices or not. And tonight, under Zeus's bored supervision and your sleepy presence, that clock keeps ticking. Softly, slowly, inevitably. The golden scales have settled into a kind of sleepy rhythm, humming like a contented old cat made of polished bronze. You sit next to Zeus. Well, not next to him exactly, more like a respectful mortal distance away, watching the divine spreadsheet refresh for the 1000th time. There's something hypnotic about it now, like fate has embraced a snooze-button lifestyle. Even the scrolls appear slower to arrive, as if they, too, are thinking, is this worth weighing? Really? A new scroll flutters in. Zeus groans without looking. Let me guess. Someone tripped and didn't die, but kind of thought about the possibility of dying, and now we have to weigh it. Close. It's a potter from Argos who intentionally dropped a plate so his apprentice wouldn't feel so bad for dropping the first one. Noble, petty, a bit performative. The scale receives it all the same. You carefully place a golden cube labeled Calculated Humility onto one pan. The other pan is empty at first, but then a small, flickering marble appears, lingering smugness. The scales tilt toward smugness and then balance back with a metallic ping. "This feels like emotional tax filing," you mutter. Zeus chuckles, finishing a pomegranate slice. "You know, that's not far off. All these little decisions, somewhere between guilt, vanity, and noble self-delusion, they stack up like receipts. And I'm the poor soul doing the cosmic audit. You wonder aloud, why bother? If the vast majority of mortal decisions barely move the dial, why weigh them at all?" Zeus squints. "You ever watch ants build a bridge with their bodies? I've watched a documentary while pretending to clean my kitchen. Well, fate's like that. One ant? Who cares? But enough of them together, suddenly there's a bridge, or a plague, or a surprise wedding. Depends on the ants." It makes sense in a circular, divine way. The little decisions are the building blocks of bigger narrative patterns. Still, you can't help but feel like you're watching history on 0.5 speed. The next fate orb drops with a dramatic fizz. It hovers longer than usual before settling into the left pan. The readout: Eudora of Thessaly declined to insult her cousin's haircut. Oh, scandalous restraint. You search through the stack of weights and eventually find a crystal labeled Unvoiced Judgment, mild. The counterweight? Family peace, temporary. The scale tilts forward and locks. Zeus muses. That one might snowball. He adds a small golden thread to a pegboard behind the scale. You blink. Wait, when did that board appear? "Oh, that's the web of maybe," Zeus explains. "It tracks potential ripple effects. Historians still argue whether it's predictive or reactive, but I use it to doodle possible outcomes." He points at one of the strings branching off the cousin's haircut decision. "See here? If Eudora had insulted her cousin, there's a 30% chance it would have led to an awkward family feast, which could have escalated to a wine-spilling incident, which would have ruined a scroll, which was meant for a traveling playwright. Who would have had a breakdown? And from that breakdown, a critically acclaimed tragedy." He pauses. But instead, the cousin feels moderately respected, and everyone eats their olives in peace. So there it is, the invisible drama of inaction. Zeus rolls his shoulders and stretches his arms, joints crackling like ancient trees. Sometimes, it's the things not done that tip the scales. You think of all the unspoken truths, the withheld jabs, the swerved arguments. The lives led slightly to the left because someone bit their tongue just long enough. Next scroll. This one's weirder. Menander of Mytilene believes his shadow is a separate consciousness, you read aloud. Zeus doesn't even flinch. Third one this week. The scale deposits a cube labeled Paranoia, passive, into one pan, and a cloudy orb marked Creative Potential. You watch as they balance, dip, and finally tip toward creativity. "Give it 3 months, Zeus says. He'll invent shadow puppetry. Terrible at it, but still." That's another pattern you begin to recognize. Mild delusions, surprisingly productive. Zeus calls it inspirational wrongness. He waves toward a separate, dustier scale labeled Cultural Ripples, currently being ignored by 2 sleepy muses playing cards. A thin scroll unrolls across the floor like a lazy snake. Zeus looks at it, shrugs, and reads aloud. Philomelos from Aegina finally admitted he likes poetry more than wrestling. You watch the scale process it with the efficiency of a sigh. One pan receives authenticity. The other, social risk, minimal. The result? Balanced. No major fate waves, but perhaps a small identity unlocked. He'll write terrible couplets for a while, Zeus says. Might woo someone, might get laughed at, all neutral. You rest your head on your hand. The golden scales continue to hum. Soft, even, predictable, like the world itself has tucked in under a blanket of minor decisions. Then comes a scroll with slightly more weight to it. It's not gold, but obsidian-colored, with silver threads woven in the corners. Even Zeus straightens up. Interesting, he says. This one's got texture. The scroll reads, Herostratus prepares to burn the temple of Artemis to be remembered. Ah, this one, a name echoing even now in textbooks and podcast intros. A man driven by the hunger to matter, no matter how. Zeus hesitates. We actually debated this one, he says softly. The Fates, the Muses, even Apollo. You glance at the scale. The weight labeled infamy is already in one pan. It glows a sickly green, pulsing with egotistical heat. The counterweight? Silence. Cold and soft and impossibly heavy. The scale rocks back and forth. Zeus doesn't interfere. Eventually, the pan tips toward infamy. He sighs. And that's how you get footnotes. You realize something chilling. Fate isn't always moral. It's not about good or evil. It's about impact. The scales weigh resonance, not righteousness. Back to smaller things. A scroll with wine stains. A fisherman prays for rain and then forgets. A boy carves his initials into a tree and decides it's enough legacy for now. And the scales keep humming, measuring not what's fair, but what moves the thread. You lean back, clouds soft beneath your elbows. Above, the constellations shuffle in their lazy ballet. Below, humanity nudges itself into tomorrow, one quiet, barely fateful choice at a time. You're starting to notice a pattern in the scrolls. Human quirks and divine boredom collide in the most unexpected ways. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, but the train is made of olives and the wreck is, well, mostly uneventful. A new scroll lands with a muted thud, its edges curling like a lazy sea wave. Zeus squints at it. Hilarious. Another sacrifice refusal. The text reads, Cleon of Corinth refused to offer a sheep to Dionysus, claiming he preferred wine over wool. You snort. That's like saying you prefer coffee over sleep. Zeus nods. Exactly. And Dionysus hates that. You look at the scales. One pan holds a delicate figurine of a goat, chipped on one horn. The other is empty, waiting, patient. Slowly, the goat figurine tilts and settles. No divine retribution yet, you say. Maybe Dionysus is on vacation. Zeus smirks. Nope. The punishment's in the waiting. Sometimes the gods play the long game. Here's a historical tidbit. Ancient Greeks often sacrificed animals not just to please the gods, but to maintain social order. Missing a sacrifice was like missing a staff meeting, except with eternal consequences and no coffee. But some fringe scholars suggest these rituals might have also been a form of social theater, a way to keep the community glued together by shared obligation rather than pure divine fear. Historians still argue whether these sacrifices were mostly about religion or social control. You run your fingers over the golden scales, noticing how the weight of Cleon's decision isn't immediate but persistent, like a dull ache. Fate isn't always flashy. The next scroll drops with a shimmer, its text faint but readable. Sophia, daughter of Athens, invents a game with stones and sticks. The scale brightens, then shifts as small cubes labeled innocent innovation and unintended consequences jostle each other. The balance swings back and forth until it settles toward innovation. Could be a board game, Zeus mutters, or the first rules of democracy disguised as child's play. You lean in. There's a faint buzz in the air, the kind you get before a storm or a new YouTube algorithm update. You wonder, how many tiny human inventions started like this? Small steps that changed everything, weighed gently but surely on these divine scales. The next fate is stranger. A scroll with the faint scent of rosemary and an odd, sticky texture. Zeus pokes it with a lightning bolt and grins. Ah, the famous cursed bread incident. Turns out, a baker in Delos accidentally used bitter herbs in his dough. The customers were unimpressed, and the city's harvest festival nearly fell apart. You smile. So, basically, the ancient Greek version of burning the cake at a wedding? Zeus laughs. Exactly. And the fallout? A whole lot of disappointed gods and hungry people. The scale shows two weights, culinary disaster and festival delay. The balance favors disaster, but the consequences are surprisingly light. You imagine a crowd of gods tapping their feet, waiting impatiently for the festival to resume. Here's a quirky fact. Some ancient festivals involved massive communal feasts that could last days, where food was as sacred as the rituals themselves. Messing that up was serious business. The scholarly debate? Whether these food-related mishaps influenced myth-making or were just human errors blown up by storytelling. Historians still argue whether the cursed bread incident inspired any actual myth or was just a footnote lost in time. As the golden scales hum quietly, a faint breeze brushes your skin, carrying the scent of olive groves and distant fires. The world feels simultaneously vast and intimately small, the divine and the mundane entwined like ivy on temple walls. Zeus yawns, stretches again. "You know," he says softly, "sometimes I think I'm just here to remind everyone. Even gods get bored." You laugh, feeling the truth of it. Fate isn't always about thunderclaps and dramatic destinies. Sometimes it's about missed sacrifices, ruined cakes, and games with stones and sticks. The golden scales glow warmly in the twilight, a silent witness to the slow, sleepy unfolding of human stories. The golden scales pulse softly, like a heartbeat slowed down for the night. You notice a faint warmth radiating from them, a quiet energy, as if the weight of countless tiny decisions was finally settling into a calm rhythm. Zeus lounges nearby, his massive form casting a gentle shadow that almost feels like a protective blanket. A new scroll descends, its edges shimmering with silver threads. You unfurl it and read. Nikos, shepherd of Thessaly, chooses not to steal from the herd despite hunger. The scales tip gently toward the weight labeled restraint, balanced delicately against desperation deferred. There's something profoundly human about this moment, a choice between immediate need and long-term honor. Zeus nods thoughtfully. Not every heroic tale is sung by bards, you know. Some are whispered in quiet valleys. You're reminded of an ancient historical fact. Greek pastoral societies valued honor and restraint as much as bravery and conquest. Shepherds, often overlooked in myths, were the silent backbone of rural life, maintaining balance between nature and civilization. But there's a quirky twist here. Some scholars speculate that the archetype of the humble shepherd influenced early notions of kingship and governance, representing a ruler who shepherds his people with care. Historians still argue whether this metaphor was literal or symbolic in early Greek political thought. As you place the scroll on the base of the scales, a faint glow emerges from the restraint weight. It spreads like warm sunlight, touching nearby threads in the web of maybe. You watch as potential futures flicker. Nikos' choice leading to peaceful seasons, his herd thriving, and a new respect blossoming in his village. But then there's a shadow. Another thread showing what could have been if Nikos had chosen differently. Starvation, theft, and a cycle of mistrust. You glance at Zeus, who shrugs. Every choice is a gamble. Fate just keeps the scoreboard. Another scroll, this one a bit crumpled and faintly scented with wild thyme, falls softly beside the scales. It reads, Lydia of Sparta refuses to attend a feast, claiming illness. The scales register social withdrawal and missed opportunity, with the balance hanging precariously. Zeus grunts. Ah, Sparta. Always a puzzle wrapped in armor. You wonder if Lydia's choice was wise prudence or a missed chance for alliance building. Historians still argue whether Spartan social customs pressured women into political roles or shielded them from public life. The scale wobbles as you add a cube labeled Silent Defiance against a soft sphere marked Lonely Consequence. The balance settles toward defiance, but with a hint of melancholy. Zeus leans back, eyes half closed. Sometimes the loudest rebellions are the quietest. You reflect on how the golden scales are less about absolute judgment and more about chronicling the intricate dance of human intention, action, and consequence. Next, a scroll with faint scorch marks drops near your feet. You pick it up cautiously. Theron of Delphi accidentally sparks a small fire during a ritual. Zeus snorts. Classic Delphi, home of prophecies and pyromaniacs. The scale reacts swiftly, tipping toward carelessness but balanced by unintended blessing. Apparently, the fire exposed a hidden cave filled with ancient manuscripts. You chuckle. So, a disaster turned discovery? Zeus nods. Fate loves irony. Here's a curious detail. Delphi was one of the most important religious centers in ancient Greece, famous for the oracle and its cryptic prophecies. Accidents like this were often woven into myths as signs of divine will. Historians still argue whether such incidents were embellishments or genuine events that shaped religious practices. As you watch the scale settle, you feel the weight of stories, some monumental, others almost invisible. Each choice, each accident, adds a thread to the vast tapestry of existence. The golden scales glow faintly in the growing dusk, a beacon of quiet certainty in a chaotic world. Zeus stretches again, looking toward the horizon. Weighing fate is like trying to catch smoke with a net. You smile, but somehow you do it. And with that, the scales tick on, the slow pulse of destiny echoing softly through the night. The next scroll arrives not with a flutter, but with a plop. A soft, sleepy sort of noise, like a lemon landing gently in a bowl of water. It smells faintly of brine and sun-warmed wood, and when you unroll it, the ink shimmers with sea-green undertones. Elene, daughter of Naxos, sings to passing ships from her rooftop. You blink. Like siren style? Zeus raises an eyebrow. Close, except Elene didn't lure sailors to their doom. She just liked the echo. You look back at the scroll. She sang each evening to greet the horizon. Her voice was said to soften the wind. The scales react strangely. No immediate tilt. Instead, a thin wisp of mist coils from the center, curling around weights labeled joy given freely and unknown influence. Slowly, the pan beneath joy settles downward. You think of the Greek islands, scattered like crumbs across the Aegean, and the ordinary magic of people like Elene. There's no war, no prophecy, no divine drama, just a girl singing because she wants to. And yet, in the web of maybe, her thread glows faintly. You trace it forward. One sailor hears her song and changes course. That change leads to a mist storm. Later, that sailor tells a story that inspires someone else. The ripple goes on. Historically, Greek oral traditions depended on songs and stories passed through generations, sometimes beginning with a single unrecorded voice. Elene might not have made the history books, but maybe her tune lived in someone else's. Here's a quirky thought from a fringe scholar once dismissed as eccentric, that the Muses were once mortal women whose voices echoed so long through culture, they were deified retroactively. Historians still argue whether any named muse had a human origin like Elene. Zeus sighs, almost sentimentally. Mortals don't realize how heavy joy can be. You turn to the next scroll, a little heavier in your hands. It's wrapped in faded fabric and sealed with wax shaped like a crooked lyre. Pythagoras refuses to eat beans. You pause. Wait, like the Pythagoras? Triangles and stuff? Zeus nods gravely. The very one. Swore off beans for mystical reasons. You can't help it, you laugh. Okay, I've heard of dietary restrictions, but legumes? The golden scales tilt dramatically, one side labeled principled abstinence, the other social isolation. Surprisingly, the abstinence side sinks faster. You remember this. Pythagoras and his followers believed beans had souls, or at least some sort of spiritual essence that muddled the reincarnation cycle. It's true, in the annals of ancient Greek philosophy, beans were suspect. Imagine building your whole worldview around avoiding hummus. But here's the thing. This bean business had consequences. According to some stories, Pythagoras may have died because he refused to run through a bean field while fleeing enemies. Historians still argue whether that's fact or fable, but even in allegory, it's powerful. You look down at the scale. The abstinence glows softly, but so does the isolation, because avoiding beans also meant avoiding shared meals, losing chances to connect. Zeus hums thoughtfully. Sometimes a conviction nourishes the soul but starves the heart. The next scroll is simple, unadorned, but smells faintly of jasmine. Thanos the potter saves a broken vase instead of remaking it. You trace the words slowly. A potter, pressed for time, chooses to repair instead of replace. The golden scales blink to life again, this time weighing preservation against efficiency. As you place the weight for preservation, you realize the choice feels unusually modern. It's easy to imagine Thanos with glue on his fingers, whispering to himself that beauty exists even in the flaws. A fringe theory surfaces. Some ancient craftspeople practiced intentional imperfection, believing that only the gods could make flawless things. And so, a chip, a ripple, a slightly off-center curve became sacred. Historians still argue whether this was art or just old-fashioned cost-cutting passed off as spirituality. But in Thanos' story, something else glimmers. The repaired vase ends up in a marriage ceremony, then handed down generations. The crack becomes part of the family lore. In the web of maybe, you see a thread bloom not from the object itself, but from the care invested in it. Not everything broken is meant to be discarded, you murmur. Zeus taps the scales lightly and they shimmer in agreement. As twilight deepens into midnight blue, another scroll floats down. This one thinner, almost weightless. It reads, Callisto, orchard keeper, teaches children to graft trees. The scales immediately spark a glow on the legacy side. Not wealth, not power, just the quiet, leafy legacy of passing on knowledge. Here's a mainstream fact. Tree grafting was a known technique in ancient Greece, used to preserve desirable fruit traits. Farmers learned how to stitch life together with intention and patience. Not exactly battlefield glory, but honestly, more delicious. And the fringe element? A few ancient writers hinted that grafting was taught by forest nymphs, part of a divine bargain between mortals and the natural world. Some say Callisto herself was once a minor spirit who chose humanity. Historians still argue whether these myths arose as allegories or records of real oral lineages lost to time. But the scale doesn't argue. It just tilts slowly, lovingly, in favor of legacy. You watch as the weights settle like roots pushing deep into fertile soil. You realize that not everything measured here is dramatic or loud. Some fates are quiet, like a lullaby echoing through fig trees, or a girl singing to the sea. Zeus murmurs, the most potent fates are often the ones no one notices until centuries later. You smile, letting the hum of the scales lull your thoughts into softer rhythms. By now, the night has thickened into a velvet hush, and even the stars seem to blink more slowly. The golden scales hum at a deeper pitch, like an ancient cat purring in its sleep. Zeus hasn't moved much, just an occasional flex of lightning-touched fingers, but his eyes stay sharp, watching each scroll as if they might bite. The next one arrives with a dusty cough and a frayed ribbon, ink barely legible. Damon, market clerk of Thebes, decides not to charge a widow for spoiled grain. You run your thumb along the scroll's brittle edge, the ink catching faint glints of the surrounding torchlight. It's such a small act, barely worth a mention by Olympian standards. And yet, the scale acknowledges it. Two familiar weights appear: kindness at cost and bureaucratic disruption. Surprisingly, kindness begins to tip first. Zeus chuckles. Grain prices, the ultimate power struggle. Here's your historical anchor. Food markets in ancient Greece were heavily regulated. Sellers had to adhere to strict weights, quality measures, and price controls. Breaking those rules could lead to fines or exile. So, Damon's choice? Not just kind, risky. Some fringe thinkers argue that such market acts were early resistance moves against aristocratic grain hoarding, especially during lean harvests. Historians still argue whether these economic kindnesses helped drive the first murmurs of populist governance. You glance at the scale. The kindness weight glows softly, casting shadows shaped like bread loaves and olive branches. The other pan? Faintly vibrating, as if the bureaucratic gods are grumbling in some celestial filing cabinet. In the web of maybe, You see the widow telling others of Damon's gesture. Later, one of her sons joins the city guard. He defends the market during a food riot. The thread tightens, not into glory, but stability. A small mercy becomes a quiet anchor. You breathe in deeply. The scent of old parchment and crushed time lingers, interrupted by the arrival of the next scroll, a curious one, smeared with what looks like paint. Sophronios of Euboea begins carving birds into temple pillars. You tilt your head. Was that allowed? Zeus peers at it. Depends on the bird and the temple, but artists like to test boundaries. The scales react in kind, this time balancing aesthetic rebellion and cultural innovation. A peacock feather materializes on one pan, a chisel shard on the other. In ancient Greek architecture, temples were often symmetrical, austere, and symbolically ordered. Decorative flourishes, especially personal ones, risked accusations of impiety. But Sophronios? He just really liked birds. Fringe scholars have mused that the inclusion of animals in sacred spaces wasn't just art. It was smuggling in folk traditions, blending local animal symbolism with Olympian iconography. Historians still argue whether such acts were deviant or devotional. On the scale, innovation wins by a beak. The birds, apparently, struck a chord. Later, temple apprentices copied them, thinking they were sanctioned by the gods. And just like that, one artist's rebellion became canon. Zeus hums. Mortals always rewrite the rules, and then pretend it was tradition all along. A breeze stirs the scroll pile, and another tumbles free. This one is flecked with sand and sealed with a piece of coral. Myrrha, sea merchant's wife, invents a faster method of drying fish. You blink. That's oddly specific. Zeus grins. That's innovation, my friend. The golden scales barely hesitate. They produce weights labeled domestic ingenuity and trade evolution, and the balance dips decisively toward the latter. Here's a fact that doesn't always make it into mythology class. Women in ancient Greek households often managed the economics of food storage and preservation. Salting, drying, fermenting, these weren't hobbies. They were survival techniques. Myrrha's method apparently increased shelf life, reduced spoilage, and boosted her family's trade fortune. It may not sound Olympian, but in the web of maybe, her thread flashes forward into thriving port towns and stronger food security. Fringe thinkers propose that some of Greece's maritime trade supremacy hinged not just on ships, but on how well the fish kept. Historians still argue whether the success of small families like Myrrha's influenced larger shipping guilds and alliances. You glance at Zeus. So we owe part of Mediterranean stability to better fish drying? He shrugs. Wouldn't be the weirdest origin story. A few paces away, another scroll lands gently on your shoulder. This one feels heavier than usual. Emotionally, not physically. Its parchment is pale blue, almost translucent. Alexios, playwright's son, refuses to finish a comedy after a friend's death. You feel that one in your chest. A moment of grief. Powerful enough to pause creation. The scales register this with unexpected delicacy. Two weights appear. Creative silence and emotional integrity. Both hover, equal at first, before integrity pulls slightly ahead. Here's the backdrop. Greek theater was a civic duty as much as entertainment. Refusing to perform could be seen as a statement or a scandal. Yet mourning had its own rules, its own sacred space. Fringe commentary has explored how the absence of certain plays might reflect deeper shifts in personal or political grief. Historians still argue whether lost comedies, missing from the record, were casualties of emotion or censorship. On the scale, you see potential futures unfurl. In one thread, Alexios finishes the play anyway. It becomes popular, but shallow. In another, he pauses, processes, and writes something entirely new the following year. That work inspires a shift in comedic storytelling. Fewer cheap jokes, more thoughtful satire. Zeus speaks softly. Sometimes, not doing the thing becomes the thing. You take that in. There's something profoundly restful in the idea that silence can be an act of creation too. The next scroll barely touches the ground before unraveling itself. Petros, Mason of Corinth, adds an extra stair to the city fountain because it felt right. You laugh. Architectural gut instinct. The golden scales seem to smile along, producing functional disruption versus aesthetic flow. Somehow, the aesthetic wins. That stair? It becomes the favored sitting spot for generations of children, musicians, and couples. You're reminded of a mainstream fact. Ancient Greek public architecture was about more than function. It was designed for interaction, forums, fountains, steps, shadows. The built environment shaped daily life and how people gathered. Some fringe ideas suggest that spontaneous additions like Petros's stair created micro-habitats, niches of culture and memory that were never officially sanctioned, but universally loved. Historians still argue whether these features were by design or delightful accidents. You look over at Zeus, who's watching that thread stretch into park benches, poetry, proposals. Sometimes, the weird extra thing becomes the most meaningful. The golden scales pulse again. Their rhythm matches your breathing now, slow and steady. And the scrolls? They keep coming. But so far, none of them have tipped the world. Just made it a little bit softer. By now, your feet barely touch the floor. Either the marble is softer than before, or you're not really standing anymore. Just floating, quietly orbiting these dusty scrolls and glowing scales. Zeus hasn't blinked in what feels like centuries. You wonder if gods even have to blink. The next scroll drifts down like a feather and settles itself against your arm. The seal is a crude drawing of a goat. You smile before even reading it. Melina, shepherd girl of Arcadia, paints eyes on her sheep to scare off wolves. You blink. That actually sounds brilliant. Zeus gives a grunt that might be approval. Wolves hate being watched. The scales jump awake, offering up two labels, clever survival and rural superstition. The pan under clever survival settles slightly heavier, but it's close. Here's your solid historical snack. Ancient Arcadians were famous for their flocks, and sheep played a vital role in both economy and myth. Pastoral regions like Arcadia were often seen as idealized, peaceful lands, but that peace took work. Wolves were very real, and so were the tricks to keep them at bay. According to fringe folk records, painting eyes or hanging shiny objects on livestock wasn't uncommon. Some used bits of polished bronze to simulate watchful faces. Historians still argue whether this was true predator psychology or just placebo for shepherd nerves. But Melina? She did it first, in this scroll anyway, and it worked well enough that others copied her. Eventually, some minor god of livestock protection was given the symbol of the ever-watching lamb. Funny how a prank with paint becomes a minor religious icon. In the web of maybe, you follow her sheep through time. One is spared by a wolf that hesitates, just for a second. That spared sheep is bred again, its wool used in temple veils. Softness saved by a single stroke of paint. You pet the scroll absently before setting it down. Melina, patron saint of googly eyes. Zeus almost smiles. Almost. The next scroll thumps down more abruptly. It's bundled tight, secured with thick twine and sealed with a chunk of hardened pine resin. When you unroll it, the scent is sharp and clean, like a forest after rain. Ephoros, retired hoplite, chooses to tend bees instead of train young soldiers. You glance at Zeus. Pacifist turn? Zeus shrugs, or just tired of yelling. The scales produce peaceful withdrawal and neglected duty, but unlike past scrolls, there's hesitation. Both weights bob slightly, unsure of where they belong. You recall, hoplites were the citizen soldiers of ancient Greece, farmers by season, warriors by necessity. But what happens when a warrior doesn't want to sharpen anyone else? Ephoros, the scroll says, finds more joy in bee patterns than battle drills. His choice causes murmurs. Some say he's abandoning tradition. Others bring him honey in secret. Here's your mainstream moment. Beekeeping was a respected craft in ancient Greece. Honey wasn't just food, it was medicine, offering, and trade. Even Aristotle wrote about bee hierarchy and the king bee, though he got the gender very, very wrong. The fringe twist? Some old texts claim that retired warriors with bloody auras were banned from hives, lest the bees become agitated. Ephoros supposedly disproved this. His bees flourished. Historians still argue whether that's metaphor or messy anecdote. But on the scale, the piece he chose glows steadily. In the web of maybe, a child who eats Ephoros' honey survives a fever. That child grows up to become a teacher who discourages war in a generation teetering on its edge. One hive, one choice. A gentler ripple than war ever made. Another scroll flutters down. This one's peculiar. Folded not like a scroll, but like an envelope, sealed with pressed rosemary and a dab of wax shaped like a smile. You unfold it carefully. Lycaon, city scribe, sneaks compliments into legal notices. You laugh before you even finish reading. The defendant is advised to settle within 3 days. Your penmanship, however, remains exquisite. The scales are slow to respond this time, perhaps unsure how to weigh kindness inside bureaucracy. Eventually, they present micro-compassion versus institutional dissonance. And yes, micro-compassion wins. Historically, Greek city scribes wielded more influence than you'd think. Not quite lawmakers, but gatekeepers of procedure. A well-placed word could change someone's outcome, or mood. Some fringe commentators have suggested that scribes occasionally embedded jokes, flattery, or coded protests in city paperwork, like a bureaucratic whisper in a sea of marble. Historians still argue whether any known law tablets contain these intentional soft touches, or whether we're all just reading way too much into marginalia. But Lycaon? He definitely did it. And in the web of maybe, those compliments ripple in absurdly beautiful ways. One man avoids a fight because he's still laughing about being called delightfully punctual. Another weeps when he reads that someone noticed the flourishes in his signature. Words matter, especially in places where you least expect kindness. Zeus says nothing, but the corners of his mouth twitch. The scroll that follows is stained with wine and smells like roasted garlic. You lick your lips instinctively. Desma, vineyard cook, invents a new spice blend and refuses to share the recipe. Ooh, the drama. The scales jump to life with culinary legacy versus petty gatekeeping. You watch as the pans hover, twitch, and ultimately tip, just barely, toward legacy. Here's a savory historical nibble. Greek cooks, especially those in vineyards or traveling with troops, were both artists and alchemists. Spices traveled across borders long before armies did. Recipes were guarded like gold. Fringe speculation suggests certain now-lost Greek flavors may have influenced Roman sauces via migration, not conquest. Historians still argue whether specific palate shifts came from slaves, refugees, or unsung culinary geniuses like Desma. According to the scroll, her spice blend was so beloved that rivals tried bribing her. She refused. But one night, a curious apprentice watched her movements carefully and later recreated the blend by scent memory alone. In the web of maybe, that stolen flavor becomes the house taste of a tavern in Thrace. That tavern inspires a poet. That poet writes about longing. Zeus mutters, "Even secrets find a way to be tasted." You roll the scroll shut, your stomach gently rumbling. Maybe you'll dream of time and fire-roasted olives later. One more scroll for tonight's handful. This one is plain and square, no seal, no frills. Ares, temple janitor, polishes a statue more often than required. That's it. No grand gestures, just an extra shine. The scales don't even hesitate. Devotion without recognition dips hard, glowing with quiet gold. You think of how many lives are propped up by people no one applauds. Temple janitors, street sweepers, maintenance crews. Even in ancient Greece, someone had to clean up after the drama. Mainstream records rarely mention the janitors. But fringe scholars have pored over temple expense records. Payments to unseen servants who polished columns, trimmed olive groves, and yes, shined statues. Historians still argue whether this labor was seen as sacred service or simply invisible necessity. But Eris, he did it with intention, not just obligation. In the web of maybe, a young girl passes that statue every day, sees her own face in its glow, and begins to imagine herself divine. Zeus closes his eyes for a second, maybe a blink, maybe a prayer. You sit back, the glow of the scales warming your skin. The scrolls are still coming, but for now, these moments of sheep eyes, honey jars, and unshared spice recipes are enough, and every single one is heavier than you'd think. You're starting to notice a rhythm now, the soft swish of ancient parchment, the gentle clink of the golden pans adjusting, the low electric hum of Zeus's lightning-charged breath as he reads each name aloud. It's not music exactly, but it might be the kind of lullaby only immortals know. A scroll lands on your shoulder and refuses to budge until you read it. Its seal is made of dried orange peel, slightly sticky to the touch. You peel it off and unroll the papyrus. Thaleia, orchard keeper, sings to her olive trees every morning. You squint. Is that agriculturally relevant? Zeus answers without missing a beat. Only if the trees like opera. The scales are already reacting. Ritual tenderness versus unscientific folly. The weight of ritual tenderness lands with surprising heft. Here's your rooted in fact moment. Olive trees were sacred in Greece, associated with Athena herself. Their care was almost religious. Damage to an olive tree could land you in serious trouble. So singing to one? While unorthodox, it wasn't necessarily foolish. Fringe agricultural texts mention farmers whispering blessings or lullabies to crops, believing plants responded better to kindness. Historians still argue whether these were early botanical insights or just poetic superstition. Thaleia's song, apparently, becomes famous. Her olives grow unusually plump. Local priests claim the trees are touched by Athena. A visiting merchant bottles the oil and calls it sung fruit, launching a minor culinary craze. In the web of maybe, you watch her voice travel farther than her feet ever will. Through oil jars, through dinner tables, through whispered lullabies passed to children. You hum a few imagined notes yourself as you set the scroll down. The trees probably liked it. The next scroll rolls in on a breeze that smells of salt and rust. It's damp in one corner and tied with a thin length of fishing line. Pyrrhos dockworker rescues a sunken coin purse and returns it anonymously. You grin. A sneakily decent dude. The scales pop into action. Anonymous integrity versus lost economic flow. Zeus raises an eyebrow. Did he dry the coins first? Apparently, yes. The scroll notes that Pyrrhos cleaned the coins, wrapped them in cloth, and left them at the harbormaster's desk with no note, just a small drawing of a dolphin. Fact time. Greek harbors ran on an informal system of mutual dependence. Trust among sailors, dockhands, and merchants was essential. Returning lost money without demanding reward could mark you as someone with serious street honor. Fringe anecdotes describe dockworkers with reputations as quiet saints, whose ethics stabilized whole port districts. Historians still argue whether these reputations were earned or exaggerated by later romanticism. In the web of maybe, the pouch's owner is so stunned by its return that he funds a dockside orphan kitchen. One of the children there eventually saves a fleet during a storm with an improvised anchor made from old amphora. The ripple starts with Pyrrhos and a dolphin doodle. The scroll shimmers for a moment before dissolving in a mist of salt. You taste ocean air on your tongue. You don't have time to savor it long. Another scroll whirls in like a leaf in a breeze and smacks gently into your cheek. It's scented with cinnamon and sealed with melted beeswax. Calliope, baker's apprentice, shapes loaves into animal faces for fun. You can already guess where this is going. The scales swing into position. Whimsy in routine versus wasted effort. And this time, whimsy wins without a fight. Here's a fun slice of history. Bread wasn't just food in ancient Greece. It was offering, art, and sometimes even message. Decorative loaves existed, especially during festivals like Thesmophoria. So Calliope's hedgehog rolls and dolphin-shaped biscuits? Surprisingly on brand. Fringe culinary historians speculate that such playful baking helped bridge class divides, bringing a spark of joy to even the poorest citizens. Historians still argue whether decorated loaves began in religious rites or local baker boredom. According to the scroll, children begin lining up for her bread. Soon elders claim the shapes bring good luck. Even temple priests commission her divine dough men. In the web of maybe, Calliope opens the first traveling bread cart, sparking a trend that will evolve centuries later into the food truck. Zeus wipes an imaginary crumb from his lip. Whimsy feeds more than just the belly. The next scroll thuds in awkwardly, dragging dust behind it. Its seal is smeared, probably stepped on, and there's a half-written note scribbled on the side. Cleon, amateur astrologer, insists that goats have lucky constellations. You raise a brow. Was he wrong? Zeus just mutters, "Depends on the goat." The scales hesitate, then emerge with inventive folklore versus bad astronomy. Somehow, the goat constellation theory carries enough charm to sway the balance. Here's a factual constellation note. The Greeks loved their sky stories. From Orion to Andromeda to Capricornus, the sea goat, they mythologized the stars with incredible creativity. So Cleon, with his goat-centric sky maps, may have just been expanding the canon. Fringe astronomy fans have suggested that folk interpretations of stars, especially by farmers and herders, influenced when crops were planted or animals bred. Historians still argue whether such practices were based on observable patterns or cozy nonsense. Cleon's goat map becomes popular among herders. They start celebrating goat's ascension once a year with songs, cheese, and wool shearing contests. In the web of maybe, that festival becomes a generational anchor, a moment of togetherness, of stargazing, of laughing under the same absurd sky. You look up now reflexively. The stars blink back at you. Maybe one really is shaped like a goat. The scroll that follows is unmarked and loose, almost like it didn't want to be part of the pile. Selene, young widow, tends her neighbor's garden out of boredom and forgets to stop. You blink. So she casually saves a neighborhood? The golden scales pause, then lift unintentional community building over boundary overreach. In ancient Greece, gardens were private but also porous. Walls were low, paths meandered. Helping with plants wasn't unheard of, especially in small towns. But Selene? She takes it to a whole new level. Watering, weeding, even harvesting when others are sick or traveling. Fringe social theorists argue that these subtle, unnoticed forms of labor wove the real fabric of Greek civic life. Historians still argue whether quiet caretaking played a bigger role in community cohesion than formal politics did. According to the scroll, the gardens begin to merge. Neighbors leave notes. Kids play between courtyards. Eventually, no one remembers whose parsley patch was whose. In the web of maybe, the hybrid garden hosts a poetry night. Then a play. Then a healing ritual for a sick child. All because Selene got bored. Zeus folds his arms and nods slowly. Sometimes the best legacies begin by accident. You exhale, eyelids heavy. The scales pulse gently beside you now. Not just golden, but warm, alive. And in this moment, you realize something quietly magnificent. None of these deeds involved war, conquest, or thunderbolts. Not one. Just sheep's eyes. Honey jars, dolphin coins. Bread shaped like cats. Goat constellations. And still, the world shifts. The scrolls aren't so much arriving anymore as floating. Slow, casual, like they're in no rush to be read. One bumps against your elbow, unseals itself with a lazy flick, and lands open across your lap like a sleepy cat. Anthea, vine dresser, invents new grape pruning technique by accident while sneezing. You pause. Wait, seriously? A sneeze? Zeus leans forward, amused. Histories are written in stranger ink. The golden scales shimmy into place, weighing innovative mishap against unintended crop risk. The accidental innovation, oddly enough, tips heavier. Here's your historical core. The ancient Greeks were obsessed with viticulture. They documented grape varietals, soil types, even lunar cycles affecting taste. Pruning was sacred science. A new method, even one born of pollen and poor timing, was a big deal. Fringe agricultural texts describe blessing sneezes believed to carry divine timing. There's an obscure poem that thanks Demeter for giving a man hiccups during wheat planting, supposedly aligning him with the harvest moon. Historians still argue whether ancient innovations came more from trial and error or myth-driven improvisation. Anthea's unplanned snip results in fuller clusters and fewer vine diseases. Soon, the technique spreads under the humble name sneeze cut. In the web of maybe, her name gets carved into a winery's foundation stone generations later. Not because she planned it, because she pruned with heart, with instinct, and with a sneeze. The next scroll is perfumed, clove, thyme, and a whisper of goat hair. You open it gently. Doros, candlemaker, hides tiny messages in wax for fun. The scales perk up. Whimsical subversion versus wasted labor. Again, whimsy wins, though it's a close fight. In ancient Greece, candles weren't just illumination, they were ritual. Used in temples, celebrations, even funerals. Embedding messages in wax? That's a bold choice. Fact time. Certain cults and mystery religions were known for hidden texts, written on leaves, undergarments, in knotwork. Doros might have been tapping into that tradition in his own goofy way. Fringe archaeologists have found melted candle remains with traces of ink and tiny bits of parchment, though the practice remains deeply debated. Historians still argue whether this was secret messaging or kids being weird. In the Scrolls version, a curious girl finds one of Doros's candles, reads the joke inside. What did the satyr say to the nymph? Stop kidding around. And laughs so hard she starts her own joke scroll tradition at school. In the web of maybe, those joke scrolls evolve into satirical plays. One of them becomes a smash hit. Doros never knows, but his melted wax sparked an entire comedic tradition. The next scroll shows up stained with wine and fig juice. The seal's missing, probably eaten. Irenaeus, innkeeper, lets a runaway poet stay a night for free. Zeus raises an eyebrow. Ah, a rare act of tavern generosity. The scales appear, this time weighing kindness without reciprocity versus disrupted commerce. The kindness wins. Slowly but surely. Innkeepers in ancient Greece had reputations ranging from generous hosts to opportunistic penny pinchers. But hospitality, xenia, was a sacred duty, tied to Zeus himself. Turning away a stranger could offend the gods. Historical records tell of inns that housed traveling scholars and artists. Sometimes the payment came later, in songs or stories. Or never. Fringe philosophers argued that one act of kindness, especially toward a poet, could birth ripples of beauty across generations. Historians still argue whether such tales were history or hopeful fiction. In the Scrolls story, the poet pens a verse in thanks. It's recited later at a banquet where a scribe copies it down. That scribe becomes obsessed with lyrical storytelling, inspires a pupil, and, well, you know how these things go. The web of maybe doesn't track money, it tracks meaning. Irenaeus' free room was worth a kingdom. You're starting to feel cozy now, like each story is a blanket tucking itself around you. The next scroll arrives already open, ready to whisper. Lydia, chorus girl, lip syncs when sick and no one notices. You blink. Scandalous. Zeus chuckles. Even muses get colds. The scales consider performance deception versus artistic preservation. And to your surprise, preservation wins. Fact check. In Greek theater, chorus members weren't exactly front and center celebrities. But they were vital. Their voices wove the emotional thread of every tragedy and farce. Losing one meant rewriting a rhythm. So, Lydia faked it. Just enough to let the show go on. Fringe theater historians have speculated that early forms of mime and symbolic movement arose from practical problems. Sickness, absence, or, as in Lydia's case, improvisation. Historians still argue whether these silent stand-ins were respected or ridiculed. The scroll shows a young boy in the audience who watches Lydia's expressive hands and decides he wants to be a performer, not because she sang, but because she showed him that words weren't everything. In the web of maybe, he becomes a master of gestural theater. Lydia unknowingly expands the definition of chorus. You smile. Fake it till you myth it, you murmur. The next scroll's edges are crisp, freshly cut. It hovers like it wants your approval. Menon, town crier, starts using poetry to deliver bad news. You whistle. Dude, bold. The scales pop up immediately. Eased truths versus diluted urgency. The vote is divided, but ultimately, eased truths carries the moment. Town criers were the voice of the state in many Greek cities. War declarations, new taxes, even plague warnings came through them. Menon, according to the scroll, started rhyming those horrors, softening the blow. Historical note: poets often walked the fine line between truth and tact. Even Hesiod spun advice and law into verse. And everyone loves a rhyme, even when it says your taxes just doubled. Fringe linguists believe rhythm helped people remember urgent news better, what we now call earworms. Historians still argue whether poetic news delivery made people act faster or slower. In the web of maybe, Menon's verses inspire a generation of satirical town criers who balance humor and gravity in equal measure. One of them eventually becomes a trusted civic advisor, because people trusted those who rhymed. A soft breeze ushers in the final scroll of the night. It's round, curled in on itself like a cinnamon bun. You gently unroll it. Nikephoros, shell collector, arranges them by shape and accidentally invents pattern classification. You snort. That's got to be the chillest legacy ever. The scales once more awaken, this time weighing accidental systematization versus pointless obsession. The scales lean decisively toward systematization. Here's your fact hit. Categorization was a big deal in ancient Greece. From Aristotle's biological taxonomies to Pythagoras' musical ratios, ordering the world was half the battle. But no one really talks about the small guys, like Nikephoros and his seashell lineup. Fringe math historians claim some early classification ideas may have emerged from hobbies: stone stacking, plant pressing, even obsessive doodling. Historians still argue whether such domestic obsessions predated formal philosophy. Nikephoros never published, never lectured, but one of his students, an observant niece, documented his habit. Her scroll survives. Eventually, her pattern notes find their way to a curious scholar. The scholar writes a treatise on natural symmetry. In the web of maybe, Nikephoros' shells become the root of a study that will, thousands of years later, help an architect design a disaster-resistant dome. Zeus gently lifts the last scroll from your lap. The room stills. The golden scales flicker as if dreaming. You've seen a quiet revolution tonight, of soft choices and sleepy intentions. The kind that echo through history not with a roar, but with a whisper. The weight of good often begins as small kindness. You lie back, letting the weight of that truth settle into your bones. The night deepens, and the golden scales float beside you like patient, shimmering guardians. You're almost drifting when a peculiar scroll slips out of the pile and flutters open on its own. It's embossed with tiny symbols shaped like bees. An odd choice, since the wax smells faintly of pine resin. Melissa, beekeeper's daughter, hums a tune to calm the hives, accidentally improving honey production. You chuckle softly. Apparently, bees appreciate a good lullaby. Zeus nods approvingly. Some melodies can't be measured. The scales tip decisively toward gentle influence over coincidental luck. It's a subtle victory, but a victory nonetheless. Historical note: Greeks revered bees as symbols of industry and the soul. Honey was sacred, used in medicine and rituals. Beekeeping was an art as much as a science. Many kept hives near their homes, and some believed bees were messengers between worlds. Fringe apiculturists claim that humming vibrations can actually influence bee behavior, calming colonies during harvest. Historians still argue whether these practices had a scientific basis or were charming superstition. The scroll describes how Melissa's gentle humming reduces bee aggression, resulting in richer honey yields. The extra honey funds a village feast that lasts for days, just the kind of cozy community glue stories get made of. In the web of maybe, the tradition of humming to bees becomes a folk custom passed down through generations. It's never officially recorded, but it shapes a culture's relationship with nature. The next scroll rolls over like a lazy wave, its edges frayed with use. Philemon Cobbler designs shoes with extra padding because feet deserve comfort too. You smile, imagining ancient Greek sandals suddenly feeling like cloud slippers. The scales swing. Practical innovation versus unnecessary luxury. This time, practical innovation wins hands down. Historically, Greek footwear was utilitarian, but there's evidence that some craftsmen experimented with comfort features, especially for travelers and messengers. Fringe historians argue that small comforts like padded soles contributed to longer travel distances and thus, cultural exchange. Historians still argue whether these minor innovations had significant social impact or were niche indulgences. Philemon's padded shoes become popular among marathon runners and military couriers. One particularly grateful soldier credits the shoes with saving his feet during a long march. In the web of maybe, that extra comfort sparks the eventual creation of sports shoes. But that's a tale for another bedtime. A thin scroll slips in next, scented with lavender. Daphne Potter hides little notes in jar lids, turning her wares into secret message containers. The scales flicker, weighing creative playfulness against market confusion. Playfulness carries the day. Fact check. Ancient Greek pottery often featured inscriptions, but hidden notes? That's a delightful twist. Fringe scholars suspect that personalized messages or symbols could have been a form of early branding or even secret communication in times of unrest. Historians still argue whether such hidden notes were widespread or isolated artistic flares. Daphne's jars become coveted not just for their shape or glaze, but for the surprise they carry. People start collecting them, hoping to find a secret message or a lucky charm. In the web of maybe, this playful tradition sparks an interest in hidden meanings that will influence art and literature centuries later. The next scroll is heavier, sealed with a carved stone bead. Theron Fisherman invents a new net pattern that accidentally catches less juvenile fish. You nod. Sustainable fishing, accidental hero. The scales deliberate between environmental awareness and fishing yield loss. Environmental awareness nudges ahead. Fact. Ancient Greeks were aware in some ways of sustainable practices. Some coastal communities imposed fishing limits or seasonal bans. Fringe marine historians note that new fishing techniques sometimes emerged from trial and error, with unexpected ecological benefits. Historians still argue whether these were intentional conservation efforts or fortunate accidents. Theron's net design becomes standard among local fishermen, improving fish populations over time. The community enjoys steadier catches year after year. In the web of maybe, this accidental conservation helps preserve marine ecosystems that feed generations. The scroll drifts away, replaced by one tied with a golden thread. Callimachus' scribe begins doodling margin notes that evolve into early comic storytelling. You grin. The grandfather of Greek memes. The scales weigh creative innovation against scholarly distraction. Creative innovation dominates. Historical fact. Greek manuscripts sometimes included marginalia, comments, sketches, even jokes. These notes occasionally sparked new literary forms. Fringe manuscript experts argue that doodling was a creative outlet that helped scribes cope with monotony. Historians still argue whether margin notes influenced mainstream literature or remained isolated curiosities. Callimachus's playful scribbles catch on. Soon students start imitating his style, adding humor and narrative to texts. In the web of maybe, this evolves into a storytelling tradition that influences comedy and satire in Greek culture. Another scroll, worn and soft as old cloth, slides in. Euphrosyne herbalist blends unexpected plants, creating a soothing sleep remedy. You yawn involuntarily. The scales settle on healing innovation over potential risk. Fact: Greek herbal medicine was advanced, but experimentation was often cautious and oral tradition played a big role. Fringe herbalists credit such creative blends with influencing later pharmacopoeia. Historians still argue whether these innovations were scientific or lucky guesswork. Euphrosyne's remedy spreads quietly, helping insomniacs and anxious villagers find rest. In the web of maybe, her blend becomes the basis for a calming tea recipe that lasts for centuries. You stretch, feeling the weight of these small acts settling softly in your mind. The scrolls now feel like a soft rhythm in the room, each one unfolding a quiet story that makes you think. Sometimes the tiniest ripple can stir a tidal wave. One arrives with a faint scent of olive oil and roasted herbs. You catch the title as it drifts open. Phryne market vendor invents early advertising slogans by accident. You smirk. Nothing like hawking goods with a catchy phrase, ancient marketing hustle. Zeus chuckles softly. Even gods appreciate good salesmanship. Historically, Greek markets were lively hubs where vendors called out their wares. But formal advertising? That's a later invention. Yet some inscriptions reveal playful phrases or witty sayings meant to attract buyers. Fringe scholars debate if these slogans were spontaneous or carefully crafted. Historians still argue whether marketing was an art or just good loud-talking. Phryne, according to the scroll, coined a slogan about olives that caught on and spread across the agora, giving her stall an edge. Olives as golden as Athena's shield. Who wouldn't stop to hear that? In the web of maybe, her catchy phrase becomes a seed for advertising culture, showing the power of words to influence even in a noisy marketplace. Another scroll twirls in, edges crisp, the ink faint but legible. Damocles, philosopher's assistant, accidentally invents the first metaphor when describing a dangerous situation. You raise an eyebrow. Ah, that famous sword hanging overhead. The scales wobble between figurative insight and dramatic flair. Figurative insight wins by a hair. Fact: the sword of Damocles' story is famous, but some scholars suggest it might be a later addition to philosophical teachings, crafted to illustrate a point dramatically. Fringe philologists argue the metaphor's origins may have older roots, but historians still debate the precise source. In the scroll, Damocles uses the metaphor to explain the constant threat borne by rulers, a vivid image that resonates through centuries. In the web of maybe, this metaphor becomes a cornerstone of political discourse, showing how language shapes thought. The next scroll smells faintly of wood smoke and ink. Its title reads, Leander, shipwright, discovers a new joint technique by watching bird wings. You nod appreciatively. Nature-inspiring engineering. Classic. Historically, Greeks admired nature's designs. They studied birds and animals to improve architecture and mechanics. Fringe engineers note that biomimicry has ancient roots, though its depth is hard to trace. Historians still argue whether inspiration was deliberate or coincidental. Leander's joint holds strong through storms, becoming standard on Athenian triremes, subtly influencing naval supremacy. In the web of maybe, this observation leads to advances in shipbuilding, helping Greece dominate seas. A delicate scroll, embroidered with tiny silver stars, slides in next. Selene, astronomer, charts stars by tracing shadow patterns on sundials. You blink, intrigued. Ancient sky mapping with a twist. Fact: Greek astronomers made detailed star charts. Sundials were common, though typically used for timekeeping. Fringe historians suggest some early attempts at celestial mapping involved creative sundial use. Historians still debate the accuracy and purpose of these early charts. Selene's work, recorded quietly, influences future astronomers, aiding navigation and calendar creation. In the web of maybe, her shadow tracings become foundational in understanding time and the heavens. Another scroll, faintly scented with mint, unfurls slowly. Phelon baker accidentally invents a layered pastry when attempting to fix a broken loaf. You chuckle. Accidental pastry chef? Delicious mistake. Historical baking in Greece was practical but inventive. Though layered pastries as we know them emerged later, experimental baking surely occurred. Fringe culinary historians point to small mishaps evolving into classic recipes. Historians still argue whether such inventions were intentional or serendipitous. Phylon's layered creation becomes popular at festivals, inspiring a tradition of sweet, flaky treats. In the web of maybe, this pastry recipe travels far, influencing Mediterranean cuisine for centuries. The final scroll in this set is thin, worn, and stained with tea leaves. Irene, peace negotiator, uses storytelling to end a local feud. You feel the warmth of the moment. Storytelling as diplomacy, oldest peace treaty. Fact: Greek culture valued rhetoric and persuasion. Storytelling was a tool for negotiation and education. Fringe peace studies scholars argue that narrative shaped many social resolutions. Historians still debate the role of stories in official diplomacy. Irene's calming tales ease tensions, allowing dialogue and reconciliation. In the web of maybe, her approach sets a precedent for using empathy and stories in conflict resolution. You lean back, the flicker of the golden scales now almost hypnotic, as these soft stories wash over you, tiny threads weaving a grander tapestry. The golden scales now seem less like an ancient artifact and more like a heartbeat pulsing through the room, steady and curious. A breeze nudges a fresh scroll toward you, crackling softly like dried leaves. Xanthos, shepherd, invents a new whistle to call flocks from hidden pastures. You raise an eyebrow, imagining a shepherd with a Bluetooth ringtone. Early sound tech, shepherd edition. Historically, shepherds used whistles and calls to manage flocks, but inventing a unique whistle for specific commands? That might be a local innovation. Fringe ethnomusicologists suggest certain whistles might have encoded complex instructions. Historians still argue whether this was widespread or isolated genius. Xanthos's whistle reduces lost sheep incidents, easing daily worries for shepherds and families alike. In the web of maybe, this small sound invention influences animal husbandry techniques for centuries. Next scroll, dusty and delicate, reveals Hestia, Hearthkeeper, designs a ritual for lighting fires that balances safety and ceremony. You feel the flicker of warmth just reading the words. Fire safety meets sacred tradition. Fire was essential, sacred even in Greek homes. Rituals surrounded its use, but practical safety measures? Less documented. Fringe archaeologists have found hearth remains suggesting careful fire control. Historians still debate how ritual and practical concerns merged in daily life. Hestia's ritual becomes a model blending reverence and responsibility, shaping household practices. In the web of maybe, this tradition endures in festivals and family customs for generations. Another scroll, smelling faintly of wet stone, slides open. Pericles, architect, experiments with curved columns to improve building stability. You nod appreciatively. That subtle curve you notice on Greek columns? Not just aesthetic. Fact: Greek architects did introduce entasis, the slight curve in columns, to correct optical illusions and strengthen structures. Fringe architecture scholars argue about the precise reason for entasis, aesthetics versus engineering. Historians still debate the dominant motivation. Pericles' innovation improves temple durability and inspires classical architectural styles. In the web of maybe, entasis becomes a defining feature of Western architectural heritage. A scroll edged with dried rose petals unfurls slowly. Chloe, perfumer, blends scents to evoke memories of lost loved ones. You inhale deeply, the imagined fragrance almost tangible. Ancient aromatherapy with emotional depth. Perfumes were common in Greek culture for cosmetics and rituals, but using scents specifically for memory recall? More subtle. Fringe psychologists propose scent memory links are ancient but not fully understood. Historians still debate the emotional intent behind Greek perfumery. Chloe's blends become cherished in mourning ceremonies, easing grief through sensory connection. In the web of maybe, her perfumes influence healing rituals and emotional expression. A thin scroll spotted with saltwater stains whispers open. Nico's sailor develops knots that hold firm even in stormy seas. You run a finger through your hair, thinking of tangled cords. Not science, life-saving art. Historically, sailors relied on a variety of knots, some named and passed down, but innovations likely emerged continually. Fringe maritime historians note that knot designs evolved with seafaring challenges. Historians still debate how much deliberate innovation versus trial and error shaped knotcraft. Nikos knots become standard, helping crews survive treacherous voyages. In the web of maybe, his techniques influence maritime safety and lore. The final scroll, surprisingly heavy and smooth, slips toward you. Electra Poet coins new words to express complex emotions. You smile. Language evolving, one feeling at a time. Greek language and poetry were rich and evolving, but new words to capture subtle feelings were always in flux. Fringe linguists argue that poetry pushed linguistic boundaries. Historians still debate the origins of many ancient Greek terms. Electra's neologisms enrich emotional expression in lyric poetry and everyday speech. In the web of maybe, her words ripple through literature and thought. You feel the golden scales balance these quiet human sparks, the everyday innovations and tender inventions that shape lives beneath the thunder of grand myths. The golden scales glow gently, like the last embers of a fading campfire, casting long shadows that flicker and dance around you. You reach out as another scroll drifts in, its edges soft with use, and its scent faintly reminiscent of fresh rain on stone. Phrixus Weaver experiments with colored threads, accidentally inventing a rudimentary form of tapestry storytelling. You grin. Early Netflix, but with threads and a lot more patience. Historically, Greeks used woven textiles for clothing and decoration, but tapestries that told stories? They were rare but incredibly prized, often reserved for temples and palaces. Fringe textile historians suggest that some of these woven narratives might have been the forerunners of visual storytelling in art. Historians still argue whether tapestries were widely used for narrative purposes or primarily decorative. Phrixus's colorful tapestries capture mythic scenes and village stories, becoming treasured heirlooms passed down through generations. In the web of maybe, his invention fosters a new artistic medium blending craft and storytelling. A nearby scroll, slightly heavier and tied with a ribbon of silver thread, unfolds to reveal Callista, dancer, invents a new form of interpretive movement inspired by natural phenomena. You nod slowly. Imagine dance as storytelling without words. Greek dance had ritualistic and social roles, but innovative interpretive forms weren't common until much later. Fringe performance scholars believe that early improvisations paved the way for more expressive dances. Historians still debate how much dance conveyed narrative versus symbolic or religious meaning. Callista's fluid movements mimic waves, wind, and seasons, offering audiences a new way to feel and understand the world. In the web of maybe, her dances inspire future theatrical traditions and expressive arts. Another scroll, marked with the faint imprint of a seashell, floats open. Thanos sculptor experiments with mixed materials, combining stone with metals for texture. You touch the imagined surface. Texture and shimmer, ancient mixed media art. Greek sculpture was mostly marble and bronze, but combining materials was rare and experimental. Fringe art historians argue some mixed techniques might have been overlooked due to fragility. Historians still debate the prevalence and impact of such mixed media works. Thanos' sculptures, though fragile, create new visual effects and inspire artisans to push boundaries. In the web of maybe, his experiments influence later art movements embracing material diversity. A thin, worn scroll with faded ink surfaces next. Eudora, mathematician, applies geometric principles to design city layouts. You smile thoughtfully. Urban planning meets ancient math. Greek city planning combined practical needs with aesthetic and symbolic considerations, though applying pure math was innovative. Fringe urban historians suggest that geometry influenced early urban grids. Historians still debate the extent of mathematical influence on city design. Eudora's designs improve traffic flow and public space use, contributing to more harmonious cities. In the web of maybe, her work seeds concepts that evolve into classical urban planning. Finally, a scroll wrapped in pale blue silk drifts down. Leocadia, storyteller, weaves local legends into larger epic narratives, connecting communities. You lean in, captivated. Epic storytelling as social glue. Greek epics connected history, myth, and culture, but incorporating local tales into grand narratives was a delicate art. Fringe folklorists argue this blending helped unify diverse populations. Historians still debate the balance between oral tradition and written epics. Leocadia's skillful storytelling spreads regional pride and shared identity across city-states. In the web of maybe, her work shapes the very fabric of Greek cultural memory. You watch the golden scales gently balance these sparks of creativity and connection. Feeling the pulse of human endeavor quietly echo through time, the golden scales hum softly now. A low, steady vibration that settles into the room's shadows like a whispered secret. You feel a gentle weight in the air, as if the very essence of countless stories is resting quietly alongside you. A final scroll drifts down, its edges curling gently, ink shimmering faintly in the low light. Damia Gardener cultivates rare herbs believed to influence mood and dreams. You breathe in, imagining the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. A bit of ancient herbal therapy for your soul. Historically, Greeks used a variety of herbs in medicine and rituals, some with properties thought to affect emotions and sleep. Fringe botanical historians suggest that some plants used might have subtle psychoactive effects. Historians still debate the precise knowledge and intention behind these uses. Damia's garden becomes a sanctuary where people seek calm and comfort, blending nature and nurture in daily life. In the web of maybe, her herbs inspire healing traditions that ripple far beyond Greece. Another scroll, thin and fragile, slips out next. Leander, potter, experiments with new clay mixtures, accidentally inventing a more durable glaze. You smile. Those shiny vases you can actually use, not just stare at. Fact: Greek pottery is famous for its durability and artistic detail, but glaze technology evolved over time with some accidental innovations. Fringe archaeologists point out that certain glaze compositions might have been discovered serendipitously. Historians still debate the timeline of these developments. Leander's improved glaze makes pottery more practical and beautiful, influencing daily life and trade. In the web of maybe, his discovery spreads across the Mediterranean, boosting pottery craftsmanship. A soft rustle announces another scroll. Callimachus, librarian, organizes scrolls with a new cataloging system. You nod knowingly. Because even gods need a good filing system. The Library of Alexandria would later formalize such systems, but early attempts in Greek archives hint at organization methods. Fringe library historians argue about how systematic these were. Historians still debate the origins of cataloging. Callimachus's system improves access to knowledge, aiding scholars and scribes. In the web of maybe, his cataloging lays groundwork for future libraries. A scroll with faint traces of wine stains opens slowly. Irene, healer, develops calming music therapies using simple lyre melodies. You relax, hearing the imagined gentle strings. Music as medicine, still relevant. Music therapy has roots in ancient cultures, including Greece, where the lyre was central. Fringe musicologists explore early therapeutic uses. Historians still debate how widespread or formalized these practices were. Irene's melodies ease pain and anxiety, blending art and healing. In the web of maybe, her approach resonates through centuries of medical practice. The last scroll, soft and almost translucent, floats down like a feather. Zeus's golden scales, as myth and metaphor, weigh more than metal. You pause, feeling the metaphor deepen. Scales balancing more than just God's fates. This ancient symbol represents justice, fate, and moral equilibrium, echoing through culture and philosophy. Fringe scholars interpret the scale's significance diversely, while historians still debate its earliest origins and exact symbolism. In the web of maybe, The scales embody humanity's quest for balance amid chaos, a timeless story for every age. You sit back, the golden scales now a warm glow, their quiet weight a comforting presence. Now as your thoughts drift gently from those golden scales, feel the soft hum of night settling around you like a velvet blanket. The stories you've traveled through aren't loud or thunderous. They're whispers, like the rustle of olive leaves in a calm evening breeze, quietly shaping the world beneath the stars. Breathe in slowly, letting the gentle rhythm of past lives and small inventions soothe your mind. Imagine the flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows on ancient walls, where quiet moments of creativity, kindness, and discovery blossomed, unseen but ever present. Remember, these myths and histories don't demand your attention with booming storms or crashing thunder. They invite you to rest, to dream, and to imagine the invisible threads that weave us all together through time. So, as you close your eyes, feel the weight of those golden scales balance your thoughts into peace. Let your breath slow, your muscles soften, and the hum of the world lull you deeper into calm. Good night and sweet dreams.